Hi, sweeties. How are you doing? Welcome to Naya Sing. And thank you all so much for all the love and support. Hope you all are doing great. So, on this conversation of how Black people lived during the Jim Crow era and how some people said it was really great, like better for Black people. And a lot of people had a lot to say and all that. But then, I mean, there was an interview also, people trying to grab the Donald interview to see why he said what he said. And a lot of people who also their parents or their great grandparents or their grandparents, lived through that era, were able to share some experiences and all that. They learned from their maybe grandparents, parents, and the rest of it. And some were really very mad that somebody who actually got married to a could come out to say something like that. And a lot of Black people were like, during that was not even a great era. And I personally knew that it was not a great era for anybody. And for somebody to come out to say it was better, I mean, a good era for Black people, the person is actually trying to gaslight and the rest of it. And some people actually shared experience of how, like, could walk into your house and take your food or take something from you and the rest of it or the rest of it, and you are still answering the master and the rest and all that. And you all remember that, I mean, like, redlining and all that were a thing. And somebody actually mentioned something here that really got me like, is this really for real? Let's get into this.
Black people weren't allowed to vote at all during Jim Crow.
Well, first of all, there were areas in the United States where Black people did vote.
Under Jim
It wasn't
Crow?
universal throughout the United States. So let's just be perfectly honest about that. I just told you it was not universal.
We know Jim Crow
there were
wasn't
areas,
throughout
but
the United
obviously
States.
Black people were suppressed from voting. That's what
Yeah.
the purpose of not just the 64 and the 65 voting rights back, but so many others. But let's get back to what I was saying.
So you're inaccurate
All
there.
I was talking about is about Black families. No, I'm not being inaccurate.
During Jim
You
Crow,
are being
more Black
inaccurate.
people
This is the
voted
problem.
conservative. They didn't vote conservative because they weren't allowed to vote. That is the essence of what Jim Crow is.
So again, Joy, I'm gonna come back to my original point. It is talking about the family unit,
Last
having
question,
more
last
fathers
question,
in the
last
home,
question,
which
last
creates
question.
better people going forward.
Last question,
That was
and
what
then
I
I'm going
said
to let
in
you
my
go.
comment.
Last question. We're out of time,
Sure,
but I'm
go
going to give
ahead.
you one more question. During Jim Crow, could your family have
Sure.
existed? You are in an interracial marriage. Your wife is a white conservative
Yeah.
activist. Could your family have existed at all during Jim Crow?
No, it could not, Joy, and we all
Okay.
know that. But that's why I am blessed to live in America today as opposed to America during that time. But we cannot ignore the realities of not having fathers in homes. That is important for Black people today and all people today as we move forward for a better America.
We are out of time. What I'm grateful for is that we do not live in the Jim Crow era and that fathers do not face the
So
threat
am I.
of lynching.
I'm very grateful
And
of that.
perhaps don't bring up Jim Crow when you're trying to make that example. Black people weren't allowed to vote at all during Jim Crow.
Well, first of all, there were areas.
You know, he paddles what he's saying. First of all, he said that when you look at it, basically demise the black man at home. But you're a Black man who married a white woman. You engage into interracial based on your option, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you was living in the era of Jim Crow law, you could not be married to your wife. Matter of fact, they would have hanged you, okay? They would have put you in jail because there was laws against interracial race. If you look at the time now, if we could push the clock into forward and eliminate some of the negative things that was happening during our era in the 1800s and even in the early 1900s, okay? We wouldn't be in that level to be able enough to engage with any type of person outside our race, okay? We would have been gone to jail because they would have said it was against the law, or you would have seen separation of. During the Jim Crow era, there was no unity. There was no strength. They were segregating Black men from their families because 9/10 of the time, an average Black family, if they even owned a home or owned the land and they were working on that land and trying to make ends meet, they will find some way to put that Black man into jail. Okay? You look at so many cases where men were stripped from their homes, Okay, and the women had to end up surviving on their own and tending to their children, or leaving their place in destitution and moving and go live with some other family or relative because she couldn't afford to do the type of strength and work that her husband was doing. Because number one, he was either in jail or he was killed. I mean, I look at history of many other women. Let's take, for example, Mary Turner. She was an average black woman. Her and her husband was fighting for the rights because the husband was being every time he was being bullied by people in his neighborhood. So he went to the local sheriff to try to get some help. And you know what they did? They turned around and lynched the man because he was standing up for his rights. And then when she was standing up for her rights, you know what they did? They flipped her, flipped her, and they took the baby out of her womb. And they end up lynching her for no reason whatsoever. That's the thing that they were going through in Jim Crow laws, where they were taking the law in their own hands and they were basically abusing the average black male and black woman. They were putting a wedge in homes where children had to end up going to foster care. And this is how group homes had started back in those days, ladies and gentlemen. Because when those group homes started, it was like a reform school and it was like a boarding house, and they also abused the children too. And the children had no way to turn but basically live in the destitution until they were able enough to be grown men and women. And then because of society, with all the bad scars and confliction, they ended up becoming a menace to society. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Crow laws put a wedge between families. It never united families. Jim Crow laws caused nothing but segregation, racism, and it gave the white people more opportunity to personally take the law in their own hands. Jim Crow laws even put people in jail based on lies, okay, and slander. Jim Crow laws made women to be segregated from their homes, okay, because of things that they had done and confliction. Jim Crow laws made men to be in chain gangs and be into chattel slavery back again, which was called buck plantation. That's what the Jim Crow laws did. You know, for him to sit there, I guess he needed a moment of fame to look like for Joy Reid to give him a public humiliation, because that's what he needed. And in reality, he does not realize how stupid he was. Okay, he still thinks that he did the right thing to make a statement like that. He's not brainwashed. He is really truly influenced, and and you'll be surprised how many black people, men and women that's just like him, who are still in that delusional phase and still think that America was a place of opportunity for their ancestors, and everything that people were showing from movie segments, from reading books, is nothing but a bold-faced lie. Okay, these are the people that is wrapped into some kind of cult, and they're so wrapped so deep that even if they try to get out, they can't get out anymore. These are the type of people that they believe because they went to the high prestigious schools and they have the best jobs, they have to have a white woman right next to them. You know, but little did they know that they're not trying, that their seed is little did they know they are trying to remove the black race every time when they do that, when they engage into an interaction of interrace. And that's the truth. But they don't see it because in their cult they believe they're making a movement, but they're not making a movement. It's sad. For him to act like that, that's sad, but there's a lot of black people like that. Believe you me. Look at the people that's supporting Trump. That right there, he's a cult leader, and people don't realize it. He goes to all the low people and feeling like and giving them the self-esteem to motivate them. But little does he know, he's like Reagan, because Reagan did that type of speech, did that one time. Reagan went to the Bronx, he went to the gully areas, and then he didn't even stay that long. He didn't even talk to the people and shake their hands. He kept on convincing them like the devil and telling them, if you don't vote for me, then I can't do these things. Then when they voted for him, those things was not even done. People were still in poverty line. People were being unemployment. When the blacks wanted to get union jobs, he turned around and shut off the jobs so nobody could get no jobs. That's what Reagan did. And then he wiped out the whole entire economy, and everybody believed that he was the greatest president of all time. And he brought drugs inside the system. And he populated the jail cells, okay? And each politician that came in after his office follow the same type of code and pattern. Be very influential to the minorities, slap them in their back and make them feel like they're a part of something, then later on demolish their community, because that's what they did. And he's the type of person that will be the go-to man to do that.
So the last couple of videos that I did in regards to Byron Donalds and his insinuation that black people were doing better under Jim Crow because the black family was stronger and black people were getting married. I did my own video, and then I shared some excerpts from Joanne Reed's interview with Byron Donalds. Now, I'm going to share with you an excerpt from Abby Phillip's interview with Byron Donalds. If you haven't seen any of the videos that I've done, it's because TikTok is suppressing it, so you're going to have to go back and into my profile on my page to get to the videos. But let's listen to what Abby Phillips said to Byron Donalds.
Abby, let me put it to you like this. In the Jim Crow era. Let's agree on something. I am, obviously one of the better communicators in the Republican Party. I know how to put words together.
Obviously
I do it very,
not.
very often. So I'm not going to say something that I do not agree with. What America is seeing right now, especially black America, is the gaslighting that unfortunately does happen in politics, where you take my comments and you want to weave your own political viewpoint into what I said. What I said is very clear.
I asked you to explain because I wanted to, what I want to undo is understand what you're saying here. Because if you're making a comparison, you're saying the black family was together then, they're not together now, and you're using that to try to say that things are bad now. Well, first of all, let me just to set the table here. By pretty much every available measure, black families, black individuals in this country are better off today than they were during Jim Crow. Would you agree with that?
Abby, of course I would. I'm not making that point, and this is the problem. What the Democrats, what Hakeem Jeffries did on the House floor, what Jamie Harrison, what the president of the NAACP, what the Biden campaign, because they're the ones who started this. It was really the Biden campaigns who were trying to cherry pick everything. They're trying to twist my words into saying something. I never said that. What I was talking about was specifically black families. And the point that black families being together is a great thing for the black community. And you do have to acknowledge the empirical fact that before Lyndon Johnson's policies and the welfare state that was created in the United States, I'm not talking about good, bad, or indifferent.
But what about
black families were, black marriage rates were significantly higher.
Well, what about
They're
other
rising
things that
again
might have,
in America. That's a good
well,
thing. We should
what about other
celebrate
things
that
may have contributed to the, maybe the decline in marriage rates, which, by the way, is not unique to black families. That's happening actually across racial groups. But what about other things? I mean, what about redlining? Do you think that had an effect on the black family? What about mass incarceration? What about the war on drugs, which was pushed by a Republican president whose advisor said it was specifically to target black people? What about all of those things?
Look, if you want to talk about redlining and a lot of the other policies that were put forward, quite frankly, by the Democrat Party, if you're going to go back to Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was Democrat policies.
Well,
that's what that was.
I know that you know this.
Don't cut me off when I'm trying to make a point.
Let me just, I have to correct a factual point here. I know that you know that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party of today are ideologically not what they were during Jim Crow. You know that, Congressman. So to suggest that, the Democrats of 1920 are the same ideologically as the Democrats of today is inaccurate. So just You can continue, but I wanted
That's not totally true, Abby. And I think if we want to have that conversation about the policy positions between Republicans and Democrats, we can have that conversation. But
one of the other
Abby,
things,
do you want to have a conversation?
One of the other things,
I'm trying to understand how you want to
brought it up, because since you brought it up on the conservative thing, the other thing that you said was Black people voted more conservatively. Were you talking about them voting for Republicans?
In part, yeah, because that's just an empirical fact. That's what we know. That did happen. And the only corollary that I am making is that when families are together, and now you're trying to find a way for you to build wealth within your family unit, you're thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. Because at the end of the day, you want your children to be able to stand on your shoulders. I was very, very fortunate. My mother was able to build a platform for me to be able to stand on and to be able to achieve. Same for my sisters. I'm a very blessed individual because of that. My only point is that when you have a family unit, husband and wife living together, striving together, grinding together, raising children together, you start thinking about public policy in a myriad of ways. And my belief is that dynamic allows people to start thinking about public policy in a much more conservative way as opposed to a much more progressive way. That's my point.
That might be, I mean, I think you're a Republican, so you're entitled to that opinion. But I think what people are taking issue with is you made a couple of statements of fact. And one of the things I was asking you about whether you were talking about Black people voting for Republicans, in the time period that you're talking about, the LBJ time period, they started voting for Democrats. And the reason is because of civil rights, because a Democratic president was passing bills that gave them rights. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, the Housing Fairness Act. So do you acknowledge that when Democrats Black voters vote for Democrats, it's actually because there's a history there. There's a reason that they voted for Democrats in that time period, not because they were just getting welfare money.
Abby, let me be clear. I don't deny that. I think it's also important for the record to be clear that you had the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate were filibustering the 64 Civil Rights Act led by Robert Byrd, who, by the way, was a mentor to Joe Biden when he went into the United States Senate. So if we're going to talk about the history, let's talk about it clearly and completely. Republicans have been the ones who are pushing not just the 64 Civil Rights Act, but the other 4 Civil Rights Acts that occurred before 1964. That's the history of the country. I'm not denying that. Abby, can I finish my point? All I'm asking is to finish my point.
On the facts here, there were Southern Democrats who opposed these civil rights bills. But a majority of them voted for it. It was also led by a Democratic president. So you acknowledge that Southern Democrats were recruited into the Republican Party in the time period after that. So when you talk about this, you just have to acknowledge that there's been a switch happening in the two parties. It's not the same today as it was during Jim Crow. And so when you say that Black people voted conservatively, that actually doesn't really tell us anything. It just tells us that they voted for the Republican Party, which is a different thing than it is for today.
This lock right here is bugging me. But nevertheless, like I said in my last video, Byron Donalds was trying to insinuate in his statement that Black people were better off during the Jim Crow era because the Black family was stronger and Black people were getting married during that era. And he was doing that because he was trying to muddy the facts of the history. That's my opinion and why Byron Donalds brought up Jim Crow, because he could have made the statement alone that Black families are trying to come together and that's why they're going towards the Republican Party, because they're supposed to be the party of family values. He could have just said that without bringing in the Jim Crow era. But he brought in the Jim Crow era because he was being intellectually dishonest. He was trying to erase how barbarically white people treated black people during that era by romanticizing or insinuating that in this one aspect of the black community, things were better. Shout out to Abby Phillip. Y'all let me know your thoughts down below.
Claiming that the black family was stronger during Jim Crow, when we can actually talk to our relatives about that, is a wild claim. Recently, Byron Donalds, while trying to campaign for that other guy who was running for president, decided to stop into my hometown and drop foolishness about the black family. Before someone jumps in and says, "Oh, you're twisting his words," let's see what he actually said. Reading here from the Washington Post, you see, during Jim Crow, the black family was together. During Jim Crow, more black people were not just conservative. Black people have always been conservative-minded, but more black people voted conservatively. Let's talk about the voting thing. Because what Byron seems to forget is that, especially during Jim Crow, there were numerous laws and efforts to suppress the black vote. Reading from the History Channel, there was literacy tests to make sure that people could read, some of them being so impossible that even white people couldn't pass them. But they were grandfathered in. Poll taxes, which made voting inaccessible, not to mention all white primaries, clearly designed to suppress black people from voting or running for office. Now let's talk about the black family thing. And there's literally people that you can ask about living through Jim Crow South. I did that. And here's just a handful of things that black people had to endure living in the second-class citizenry of Jim Crow. We had to address white people as boss, captain, miss, or missus, despite our ages. We had to endure the regular use of the N-word. We had to step off of the sidewalk if we saw white people approaching. We couldn't eat or even shop at the same places. Don't even try to try on shoes. Y'all remember when I talked about the vanilla ice cream thing? Just petty. Don't even talk about pools. Y'all know how bigots feel about pools and bodies of water. We were also excluded from public parks and public events. We had separate entrances to theaters and entertainment centers, and we often had to sit in worse quality seats. We weren't even allowed to attend county fairs unless it was something called Collard Day. Do we even have to talk about the healthcare system and how we had completely separate wards in the hospital despite emergencies? I could keep going. There are very few safe spaces for black folks and black people outside of church and our families. Everything about Jim Crow was created to demean and diminish black people. But let's zoom into what Byron was really suggesting. Because for me, it seems like too quick a shift to jump from the black family was together to black people were voting conservatively. The implication here is that the only way that black families are strong is if they vote or think conservatively. When if Byron actually paid attention to any of those history classes, he would realize that black people voted a certain way out of survival, and that what you would call strength and unification was based out of that. Because if we really voted the way we really wanted to vote, y'all would think we were the most extreme of liberals. Unfortunately, our very beings are political, not made by us, but by those who would seek to suppress and oppress us. Perhaps instead of making wild claims about our families, perhaps learn a little history and stop using racist supremacist tropes for attention. Oh, so y'all don't just do this for slavery. Y'all just gonna do this for every historic, terrible thing that has happened to black people. I don't have to live through Jim Crow to know that it was terrible. And yes, I do trust the accounts that I've read about it. Why? Because too often, those accounts were largely ignored. And it was only up until fairly recently that we even started listening to first-hand accounts. But honey, Jim Crow ended in 1965. My mother was here. My dad was here. My uncles and aunts were here. My grandparents, both sets, were here. And my great-grandmother, who I grew up knowing until I turned 30, was here and told me plenty. There's nothing wrong with going by what we read. It's very strange to instill doubt in things that people have read when a lot of people clearly don't read. But furthermore, you want us to ignore our own parents, our own grandparents, our own great-grandparents? Because like I said, so many of our stories have been largely ignored up until fairly recently. I'm not ignoring what my mom told me about Jim Crow. I'm not ignoring what my grandmother and grandfathers told me about Jim Crow. I'm not ignoring what my great-grandmother told me about Jim Crow. Nor am I going to ignore the many, many stories about that particular time that I've read. The only people who want to sow doubt in such things are the people who are invested in keeping them buried. Hope that helps. Bye.
So this is all I got from the stitches, and trust me, Abby Phillips did a great job, One thing with people is that it's so easy for some people to romanticize something they never experienced or look for a way to cover up things that they never experienced. Because till this very moment, some of them will still ask you, because in the comment section and other videos that I checked out about this discussion, a lot of people were asking Black people, were you the one that experienced, did you experience Jim Crow? I probably will look for the video and also attach it. They were asking Black people, did you experience Jim Crow? And it is how insensitive some people are with their words and their actions and the things they do and the rest of it. But it is what it is. So coming out to ask people, did you experience Jim Crow, is gaslighting, because most of them are supporting what this Donald did, right? And I really don't see how people want to compare people's experience during Slay and Vereen and now. What do you really want to compare? What was good about how Black people were doing? What was good about Jim Crow? We all already know that there was nothing great about Jim Crow. For somebody to, I mean, he could have made his point, or said, like Sister Tabitha said, he could make his point and move forward. But because he is what he is, and you all already know the people that tap dance for, he also decided to bring Jim Crow into it. Jim Crow was a very terrible era for Black people. I mean, Black people did not even have any rights. Things where segregation was really very high, and the rest of it. So why do you want to compare it to now? It doesn't make any sense. And a lot of, did you live during the Jim Crow era? If not, you are going by what you read. You see? So some of them are really very mean and also want to be, I don't know. So I feel like some of them just want to also feel that like they are victims of what they do not even understand and the rest of it. And if you are asking somebody living today if they experienced Jim Crow, there are so many people that are still very much alive to this very moment that experienced Jim Crow. And let me tell you something. Some people that do not understand how all this generational trauma and all that happens. Whatever, some certain things that affected my family back then to this very moment might still be affecting them one way or the other, right? And people have refused to acknowledge that. And each time there is something, there is I don't know how, but each time there is a conversation about what happened in the past, they want to ask you, did you experience it? That is like being stupid and trying not to put yourself in people's shoes and all that. But then, how do you want to put yourself in other people's shoes when you do not act like you are human? Because for you to feel some people's pain or like understand what it feels like, you really have to be human, But then Donald has done what he's done and the rest of it, and we all can see the effect of the not even all. He can also see the effect of what he did and the interview that he granted, how it's all hitting him back and front and all that. And the fact that he has a mixed family. Like I always say, I do not have problem with where people find love, right? But I am glad that he acknowledged the fact that if he were back then, that he would not have married the person that he is with now. So you see, so how do you still want to compare back then till now? That Black people were like, what was better about their experiences or their lifestyle now and then? I mean, you can, like I said, you cannot compare death and sleep. There are two different things. You are sleeping and you are going to wake up, and you are dead, and that is the end. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.